Hey guys, let's talk about top 3 Space Marine units that have received some pretty hefty discounts in the recent midterm field manual, which might make them a much better choice for your list now. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And the third place in our top 3 is the Brutalis Dreadnought. We've talked about this guy a while ago on the channel. Now he costs 160 points compared to 175, so a 15-point discount, and that's not an insignificant amount. What is the Brutalis Dreadnought? It's essentially a Redemptor with just a melee purpose in mind. It costs 50 points less than Redemptor, but of course lacks most of the shooting output the Redemptor has, and he doesn't have the -1 damage. Instead, he has a different ability, which we'll discuss. I consider him as a perfect distraction unit for mid-board action. That's pretty much you are investing 160 points into something that is supposed to be quite efficient at doing damage to your opponent, and you're forcing them to make choices onto how to deal with this thing. So a typical distraction card effects kind of a concept. And because it's not an infantry unit that loses models, he's a model that just has all of his wounds, and the worst that can happen to him until he is dead, it's -1 to hit, which that is not going to change the situation dramatically. You're essentially making your opponent actually go and deal with this Dreadnought, completely destroy it, and only then they will be eliminating your asset. That's why distraction card effects works better in a lot of cases than a distraction infantry unit. Those have their own benefits, of course, like going through ruins, but that's a different story. Just a hint for our Space Wolves players: if you're playing them, you have a much better option for that, which is the Wolfen Dreadnought. Wolfen Dreadnought has a 4+ invulnerable save. Its special ability is a bit better, though similar to the Brutalis one, and it's a lower, smaller profile, so it's easier to hide behind ruins. But for all the vanilla Space Marine players out there, Brutalis is a great choice because he gets much better melee profile compared to Redemptor. +1 attack, first of all, so it's quite significant. Redemptor's 5 attacks, this guy's 6. His attacks are twin-linked, and he also gets a sweep mode on his claws, I think. And sweep mode is very important because one problem that the Redemptors have is that if something small charges them, like a 5-man Cabalite squad, it doesn't matter that you'll be crushing them with strength 12, AP 2, damage 3 attacks. You will only be probably killing 3 or maybe 4 of them, making you essentially stuck in combat unless your detachment allows you to fall back, shoot, and charge. Brutalis doesn't have that problem because of 1 wound profile, 1 damage profile. His special ability is the mortal wound output on the charge. On 2 to 3, he does D3 mortal wounds. On a 4-up, he does 3 mortal wounds, and on a 6, it's D3 + 3. If you combine that with Tank Shock, which he can obviously use with his strength 12 attacks, he does do a lot of mortal wounds on the charge. If you really put a lot of effort into him and give him all the buffs, he can actually take down a knight single-handedly, but that's in a very narrow window of opportunity with all the buffs attached. He also has 2 multi-melters in the chest. They are twin-linked, so you can have full rerolls to wound, and that's 2 shots of that twin multi-melter from him. What I also like about his sweep profile is the fact that it's also twin-linked, so you will be wounding most infantry on 2s at AP 2, unless it's a Space Marine where you'll be wounding it on 3s, but you still get twin-linked, so those 10 attacks with the sweep will be quite efficient against most infantry targets. Weirdly, the Brutalis has an 8-inch move, the same as the Redemptor, though in 9th edition he had a 10-inch move. I really hope they're gonna change that someday, but probably not in this edition, considering we've already had the Space Marine Codex released. So he is a perfect candidate for advanced and charge abilities like the Stormlance or Gladius. Defensively, he's also solid, the same profile as the Redemptor, toughness 10, 12 wounds, 2+ save, and OC4. So it's not an easy thing to kill. You need some real anti-tank shooting to take down the Brutalis Dreadnought, and 160 points is not that much of a return on your investment. He also works well with rapid ingress, especially when you can advance and charge, because if you rapid ingress him, you want him to be out of line of sight from shooting, and that usually means you need to be behind some ruin, and that means that the next turn when you want to move out and charge something, you'll have to walk around that ruin because you can't go through it. Still, rapid ingress is a great way to compensate his 8-inch move, because without that, it's going to be relatively hard to actually transport him to the target he wants to do damage to. You can also transport him using the Storm Raven, because he's a Dreadnought, so you can put him in that magnet cradle from on the back part of the Storm Raven. That's a very niche application, so in most cases you will be rapid ingressing him, or you can just advance and charge him across the board, though I like that less than with a Wolfen Dreadnought, for example, because it's harder to hide this guy. As always, I want to remind you about my Patreon 40k coaching service. If you're looking for help building your competitive rosters, preparing you for tournaments, or have any questions about your collection in general, check out the links for my Patreon in the description. Thank you. Next are my favorite assault terminators. I love these guys because I really like the fact that they're not messing around with any shooting weapons. They are strictly for combat, glorious combat only. They received a substantial discount of 20 points for a unit of 10, and you will be running them as a 10-man in most cases. And the reason why I think they are good is because toughness 5, 4 wounds, 2+ save, and 4+ invulnerable save is just a profile that is not easy to deal with for any army. It's a stat check of sorts that, yes, most good armies will be able to pass, but that's the whole point of this unit. They are a tar pit plus a bullet magnet. In order to enhance their capabilities as that in your list, you want to first of all increase their durability as much as possible. Only some detachments allow us that. We don't have any really good characters to do that for us in the vanilla of Space Marine book. We have options like the Feel No Pain from the Righteous Crusaders in the Black Templars, which is a wonderful combination. So 10 Hauser's Bones, you get 6+ from the Vow, and of course 5+ from the enhancement. Or you can get -1 to wound from the Inner Circle detachment for just 1 CP against shooting. So anything that buffs their durability over what it already is going to be a very big problem for your opponent, especially if it's just a 1 CP strat, so you're spending 1 CP to buff a unit that costs around 500 points with a character attached. Second thing, which is probably even more important for them, is some way to bolster their mobility, because in order for them to be a real bullet magnet, they need to be an imminent threat to your opponent. Otherwise, it'll be just very easy to ignore this unit, because if your opponent is experienced, they'll look at this 500-point monstrosity and just think, okay, it's gonna be walking 5 inches every turn. What can I do to just play around it instead of trying to go through it? You don't want them to be thinking like that. You want them to be thinking, oh no, I need to kill this 10-man unit Terminator as fast as possible, and it's not gonna be fast, believe me. How you can bolster the mobilities, for example, by just rapid ingressing them with further advanced and charge capability. So like if you're playing them in Gladius or Stormlands, you can put them in Deep Strike and then rapid ingress them turn 2 and then advance them from behind the wall. That is one option to use them. Why I'm not that big of a fan of that, because if you're waiting for turn 2 to rapid ingress them, first of all, what happens if you go first? You'll essentially have to wait until turn 3 to actually get any use from that unit. Remember, their goal is to be that damage magnet, to actually soak it up and make it inefficient for your opponent to deal with them. If they're not on the board, there's no point in worrying about them for your opponent. So that's why I personally wouldn't run them like this. Unless you have something in your army that will fulfill the same requirement for the time being as your Terminators are in reserves, or if your army works well as a beta strike force. Still, I much more prefer the combinations where they either pop up on the table turn 1, like using the Deathwing Assault enhancement, which allows you to come from reserves turn 1, which means therefore you can use the rapid ingress stratagem to come from reserves turn 1 of your opponent. And we don't have a problem with Terminators not being useful for half of the game essentially, and that's the most important half of the game. And we're also solving their problem of mobility, because we're rapid ingressing them, we're not walking them. Another way to use them is just simply using any kind of mobility that you have in your detachment that gives them extra movement. Advanced in charge is not bad, but it's not exactly enough in my opinion, unless it's combined with extra durability. In case of Black Templars, for example, they have a good option to use them, because we can have the 5+ Feel No Pain that makes them extremely durable, and also use 1 CP Devout Push. As soon as someone tries to shoot us, we just, okay, we move d6 inches closer to that thing, which is like having an extra advance in your turn. So yes, you need to work on the synergy of the Assault Terminators with your detachment and your army list in particular. They're not a plug-and-play unit yet, just because GW have really tried to limit the amount of charge modifiers we have in this edition, and our main and most natural way to use the Terminators from Dip Strike is essentially gone. We cannot just put them in Dip Strike and then, okay, turn 2, we are charging on a 7 or 6, something like that, as we could in 9th edition. Now we need to work a bit more in that synergy, but if you can find one of those options that I mentioned for yourself, they are a very efficient unit to have. Talking about their melee output, they have Thunder Hammers, of course. I don't recommend to run Lightning Claws unless you maybe want to have 1 or 2 in the unit just as a insurance policy from the small chaff units charging your squad, but that's up to you. Mostly you'll be running the Thunderhammers with shields because you want those extra wounds. And the Thunderhammers, of course, are 3 attacks each at 8/2/2, so strength 8, AP 2, damage 2, with devastating ones. You really want to run a chaplain with these guys, unless, again, you have something very strange that would help them to wound better. So perhaps for Gladius you can get by with just Honor the Chapter, but I would personally want to have Chaplain with them anyways. Plus he also gives them 4+ Feel No Pain against mortals, so that helps against a very dangerous kind of attack that will bypass your toughness, your invulnerable save, and you don't want that. And of course without +1 to wound they will really struggle against any high toughness unit, so you really want to have that access. Just for reference, with +1 to wound they do about 17 wounds to a knight, and if you can get something like +1 AP that bumps it up to about 20, if you have access to sustained hits, that will bump it up to about 23 wounds. That was calculated with Oath of Moment, of course, so full rerolls to hit and +1 to wound. Also have a nifty rule to force a battle shock test when they charge something. That can be great if your opponent has a unit that has a great defensive stratagem that they want to use when you charge them. Problem is that it's just very easy to pass a battle shock test, but it's nice to have. And they of course get the teleport Homer, which that is not really a useful rule in my opinion. And last but not least is the Vindicator. We talked a lot about this tank on the channel, and now it's 15 points cheaper from out of the blue. I really liked it at 190 points. It was an interesting upgrade / side grade from a Lancer, which is 160, but now at 175 it's directly competing with the Lancer, and they both are great options. It's a mid-size, very tough tank with a great gun. He has toughness 11, which is important because there are quite a lot of strength 10 attacks out there. 2+ save obviously is here as well, so it's quite difficult to take this thing out when it's in cover. He has 11 wounds, so just 1 less than a Gladiator Lancer, and you can shoot its blast gun, and yes, his gun is blast, into combat using its special siege shield ability. Drawback of this tank is he has move 9 compared to move 10 on the Lancer, and it's not bad. It should be enough for most purposes, but it is obviously on the slow side. That's why you really want to run this guy in Gladius or Ironstorm, where you can advance and shoot. The Demolisher cannon that the tank has is strength 14, AP 3, damage D6, D6 plus 3 shots blast, so it's pretty much good against anything. The problem with this gun is how random it is. It's D6 damage, so very random there as well, and D6 plus 3 shots is quite random also. But I find that if you have about 2 of these tanks at least, you will be on average getting exactly how much you should be getting statistically in terms of damage. And it's a very versatile gun. It's good against monsters, it's good against vehicles of any toughness, so any high toughness vehicle like a Land Raider or any monster, even a monolith with toughness 13, still great. The elite infantry will also enjoy this gun because strength 14 means that even toughness 7 highly elite infantry like the Alaris Terminators or the Centurion Devastators will still be wounded on 2s. And high AP 3 means that anything 2+ in cover will still have to fail the saves 50% of the time. Of course, another reason why you want to run this tank in Ironstorm, I pretty much think that 3 Redemptors plus 3 Vindicators is where you start the Ironstorm list. In my opinion, there's just no real reason to do it any other way. So it's 3 Tech Marines, 3 Redemptors, 3 Vindicators, and then you can add it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter at that point. So with the new price of 175, I think it's a very, very good option, especially for the Black Templars players out there where you now have to pay 170 points for the Black Templars Lancer. You can now, for just 5 points more, get a Vindicator, which is a whole level of durability above the Lancer, and its gun is essentially a side grade, and that's a compliment because Lancer's gun is awesome. Another unit that I would like to include in this list, but just top 3 sounds better than top 4, is the Jump Back Intercessors. They are so good now at 160 points per 10. Mortal wound output makes them quite efficient against most units, especially if you have access to +1 to wound or anything that buffs their output like lethal hits. So like if you're running them in Gladius, if you're running them in Black Templars, if you're running them in the Stormlands with a Chaplain on a jump back where you get extra mortal wounds from the Chaplain and +1 to wound will help them with output, I really think they are quite efficient and a nice choice. Probably see a separate video about them soon enough, so thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.